Good evening and welcome to Cocktails and Politics with American Public Square at Jewel. My name is Allison Kelzer and I'm the Student Initiative Coordinator at American Public Square, and I'll be serving as this evening's roving reporter. I'd like to start by thanking everyone who made this program possible, including American Public Square's Program Committee and all the staff and volunteers at APS. I would also like to thank our sponsors for tonight's program: William Jewell College, Marnie and John Sherman, the Hall Family Foundation, the H&R Block Foundation, Sue Seidler and Louis Nerman, and PlexPod. Tonight at PlexPod in Westport Commons in the Rabbit Room, one of my favorite places to record and produce APS programming, I'm enjoying Cocktails and Politics featured cocktail, the Danforth Manhattan. This craft cocktail was created by bartender and photographer, Mr. Ian Walla. Find this month's featured cocktail recipe by visiting any of APS's social media channels, including Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook at AM Public Square. And be sure to follow and like APS's accounts while you're there. You can also find this recipe at our website at americanpublicsquare.org/events. Tonight's segment of Cocktails and Politics features former Missouri Senator John Danforth. A lawyer and ordained Episcopalian priest, Danforth served as Missouri Attorney General before ascending to U.S. Senate for almost 2 decades. Danforth was U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations for a year and has served as Special Envoy to Sudan in 2001. Today, Danforth serves on the nonprofit Nonpartisan Commission on Presidential Debates, as well as the National Advisory Board of the John C. Danforth Center on Religion and Politics at Washington University. As always at American Public Square programming, we welcome questions from the audience. As your roving reporter, I will be watching for any questions that you may have for our guest. Please feel free to type those into the Q&A section of Zoom. If you're watching on Facebook, you can also ask questions by posting a comment on the live stream. With that, I will turn it over to our moderators for the evening, the co-host of American Public Square at Jewel's podcast, Both Sides. Please join me in welcoming Ambassador Alan Katz and Mike McShane.
Thank you very much, Allison. Senator, thank you very much for joining us tonight. We feel honored to have you with us. And it is your second visit to American Public Square, and so we're very happy to have you back. What I wanted to do tonight, at least to start things off, is, I remember when you ran for Attorney General back in 1968, I believe, and you were the first Republican elected statewide in Missouri in many years. And in a sense, you sort of created a rebirth of the Republican Party in Missouri. And at the same time, you were sort of, while you were not viewed as a Barry Goldwater conservative, you clearly were sort of on the conservative side. And I'd love for you to sort of tell us, what was it like then, and how did you see what a conservative was?
Well, back then, the Republican Party in our state was nothing. I mean, we never won. We did have a couple of people in Congress, but as far as being a statewide party, we weren't. We never won statewide elections, hadn't done it in decades. The state legislature was very heavily Democratic. I was 31 years old during most of the campaign and then 32 on election day. My wife was pregnant with our 4th daughter at the time, gave birth about a month before the election. And I assured her I didn't have a chance of winning. There's no way. And she relied on that. So on election night, everybody seemed happy except Sally. She was not pleased with this turn of events for our family. At that time, state level politics was, let's say, sleepy. The Democratic Party was pretty much of a machine, and the Republican Party didn't exist. And so the result of all of that was that politics, state offices, went to sleep. And so I was, as I say, surprisingly, I was elected and brought young people into our office. We had such a small budget in the AG's office at that time, and the legislature kept me on a very tight leash. So the only way we could do it was to bring in young people who were very smart, who could do a lot of work. And we did that. And some of the young people, well, Kit Bond was one of them right from day one. People like Brooke Bartlett and Jack Kraft from Kansas City were there. And it was a very sort of a neat thing because we were young, we were aggressive, totally inexperienced in politics and not all that much experience in the practice of law, but we were energetic, whereas state politics had not been energetic. And we became the reform movement in our state. So at one time, let's see, Kit was elected governor, and then we had the governor, lieutenant governor, state auditor, and attorney general. 4 of the 6 statewide offices were Republican. This is in the early 1970s, and all 4 of us were in our 30s. So it was, it was the youth movement, it was the reform movement. That's what it was at that time. It wasn't ideological at all. It was just, we were trying to do a good job, and I really think we did a good job, particularly given the budget.
So how would you have defined the conservative movement at that point in time? Say let's say your first 10 years in politics, how would you have defined it? And did you consider yourself part of it?
Yeah, I mean, I would have considered myself very much of a mainstream Republican. There were clearly Republicans who were more conservative than I and more liberal than I. It was a very broad party at that time. I mean, when I first ran for office, some of the people who came in to campaign for me included Nelson Rockefeller and John Lindsay. So it was a very, very broad Republican Party. There was a general consensus on big stuff. I think all Republicans, you would say, would be pro-business. All Republicans would have, to varying degrees, less enthusiasm for huge government. We were a party that believed in low taxes. We believed in the light hand of government and the private sector. And nationally, we believed in free trade. We believed in, we didn't believe in just a shutdown of immigration. Let me just put it that way. So it was a different kind of Republican Party. And we clearly were not the populist style of politics that the Republican Party has now largely become. We were not the us against them, everybody's being picked on, let's all get mad version of a Republican Party. So it was a broad party, and I was very, very comfortable being in it.
So I'd love to know what changed. So contrasting the Republican Party of today to the Republican Party of those days, were there external forces, internal forces? What caused the change?
First of all, I think you almost have to be a sociologist to understand this, but very bright people have written about it. One of the best books is by Amy Chua called Political Tribes. There are other books about how a lot of people feel that, particularly whites without college education, feel that the world has passed them by and that people disrespect them, they treat them as deplorables, they don't really care about them, and that every other part of the country has advocates in government, but nobody really understands them, and that they have been overtaken. And therefore, when they feel threatened, and then this is what Amy Cho would say, they feel threatened, and then they become tribal, they become turned in on themselves, and they become prey to the populist idea that that is some conspiracy of outside forces have it in for you, and they're picking on you, and nobody cares about you. And I, the politician, do understand you. And by the way, they're picking on you as well. And that's what it's become. So it's become a very downbeat and divisive form of politics. That really is a big change from the Republican Party traditionally, because our roots are, of course, we were the party of the Union, right? We were the party, that was Lincoln. We are the party of Lincoln. We are the party in our roots, in our values of holding America together. But this populist approach is really the opposite. It's picking at differences. It's promoting grievances and a sense of grievance, and it's very divisive. So we've had in Donald Trump the most divisive person in American political life since George Wallace. And that's a big deal, and it's a big change for our party, and it has major consequences for our country.
You know, one of the things obviously that you've been in the news about lately is your split from Senator Hawley, in terms of having supported him in the past and feeling that he has gone in the wrong direction. Can you elaborate just a little on that?
I first met Josh when he was a third-year law student, and I was in New Haven, and the dean of Yale Law School gave a dinner party for me and sat Josh next to me. And that was the first time I'd ever heard of him. And the dean said to me, he said, I want you to sit next to this young man, Josh Hawley. He is from your state. He's interested in politics. He's head of the Federalist Society, so he's more conservative than most people at Yale Law School, but he's such a good person, and I want you to know him. And that's how I first got to know him. And I kept up with him, and particularly when he was thinking about moving back to our state and maybe teaching somewhere. And I was very impressed with him. He is very able. He's smart. He's well read. He is. He was very much into what's called communitarianism, which is a different version of conservatism from the highly individualistic Ayn Rand type of conservatism. I thought that was very interesting. He had written a book about Theodore Roosevelt that was published by the Yale University Press when he was 28 years old. So my view of him was, here is an exceptional talent who is a good person, and he has a lot to bring to public life. And when he was new as Attorney General, I was very much promoting him to run for the US Senate, because I thought that he would bring to the Senate this special intellect and ability and depth that would really add something to the Senate. I saw Josh, and I wrote him a letter saying this after he won the election. He had the opportunity to be to the Senate very much what Pat Moynihan was back in my day. Now, Pat was more progressive and Josh more conservative, but he had the capacity to bring that same intellectual weight to the Senate. And so I really was very, very positive and very, I did a lot to try to get him elected, and I really believed in him and in that.
And obviously your opinion has changed recently. I think it has to be obviously a very difficult thing for you, but I wonder if you could maybe put the changes that you saw in him in maybe some broader context of looking at the Republican Party in general. So is the changes that you saw in Senator Hawley a sort of symptom of a broader issue that's there? Or was it something that you saw as specific to him and choices that he made?
I think it's broader. I believe that it's very important for America to have a competitive, responsible, conservative political party. And that's what the Republican Party has been. That was the party that I knew. We were conservative, we were responsible, we were active participants in the political affairs of the country. So I thought that. Then we changed and we went this populist idea, and we became something that was the opposite. I mean, the Republican Party, the populist version of the Republican Party isn't just different from what I knew, it's the opposite. I mean, it really is the opposite. So I've said that, it's kind of this caricature. It has some elements of what it was. It's still low taxes, and it still favors putting on the bench judges who will not try to make new law, but who will interpret the law as it's written, judicial conservatives. So in those ways, it's still the same, but in other ways, it's very different, and it's very different. Well, first of all, nobody in politics cares about the national debt anymore. So we were fiscal conservatives. Now forget about that. So nobody really cares about that, including Republicans, including Donald Trump. But the main difference is that we were the party of holding things together, the Union, Lincoln, and now we're the party of driving wedges just as rapidly and as strongly as we possibly can. And also, the new Republican Party isn't really conservative. I mean, the Trump version of the Republican Party is not really a conservative party, because one thing, I think maybe the principal thing that conservatism means is commitment to a constitutional structure, which is important for how we do business in our country. And so when you have in our party people who attack the legitimacy of an election and attack the legitimacy of a presidency, that's radical, that's not conservative, and it's undermining the constitutional structure. So this current version of our party is neither traditionally Republican nor traditionally conservative. It's something very different.
Okay, Allison, I'm going to come to you for a question in just a second, but Senator, I have one quick question for you to throw your way. So I think that it's been suggested that as Republicans, particularly the vote that's going to come this weekend in the Senate on the impeachment of President Trump, or former President Trump, that in some ways it represents the binary choice that Republican elected officials are facing, which means you're either with Trump or you're against Trump. Do you think that's really, is that a fair characterization? And how do you think things might turn out?
Yeah, I mean, it's so anybody who crosses Trump now, anybody who even says negative things about him, is going to be in the crosshairs, and will be the new verb primaried, will be opposed, and will have his or her political future very much in doubt. And not only that, will be maybe censured by the party. That's Liz Cheney and Ben Sass, censured formally. And also just when you go through, say, the airport, I mean, people are going to just harass you and hound you, and it would be brutal. So it's likely to be for them, if they stand up to them, political death, and a very painful kind of death at that. So it's sort of easy for me, because I'm not running for anything. It's easy for me to, to say what I think about Trump. But somebody who is active in elective politics, it's a very, very different matter. And you'd like to think, well, they'd be thinking more in terms of, well, what are my grandchildren going to think of me if I vote to acquit? But on the other hand, right now, they will pay a very big price.
Okay, Allison, you have a question for us?
I have so many great questions. So anytime you need to come back, let me know. Per what you've been talking about, the differences between what you're calling like the populist support for Donald Trump, there's quite a few questions that I'm pulling together here. So I'm saying and asking, what do you see as the major policy divisions between the traditional Republican Party that you know and the populist Republicans that do currently support and have supported Donald Trump?
I think some of the specific policies would be maybe most of them would be pretty much the same. I think most Republicans believe in trying to keep the tax burden light, the regulatory burden light. Most Republicans believe in a strong national defense. There are differences on trade policy and immigration policy, but there's a lot of overlap, which is why I call it a caricature, because when you think of a caricature, like in a cartoon, political cartoon, you've got something that kind of looks like the person that is represented, but with huge ears or a huge nose or big hair or something. And it's something that kind of resembles, but it's just turned into this weird caricature. And I think the big difference is the populist thing, the divisiveness, the intentional divisiveness, the stoking of the idea that you have been abused, that it's us against them, that America is at war. And that for the problems that we have in our country, it's not, let's get our act together and work on this together, but it's very much, we are at war with them. And that is a very terrible approach to politics.
I'd like to pull together a couple questions that I know people have been submitting in the chat, and thanks everyone for doing that. It's going to be impossible to get to all of them, but to try and at least pull a couple of them together. Some folks have been asking about a sort of a way forward. So some folks have asked about trying to form a new center-right party or a third party, or other folks have just been asking, and I should say, I'll put myself in this camp. For those of you that listen to our podcast, Both Sides, that's available on iTunes and everywhere else you get your podcast, Alan and I do this kind of double act. Alan's on the left and I'm on the right. But, Alan is very proudly a Democrat. But while I consider myself to be a conservative, I'm not a Republican. I've never been a Republican, and I don't necessarily see myself wanting to become a Republican in the future for many of the reasons that you just pointed out. So for folks like me, for folks who might be drawn to many of those ideas that you talked about, what do we do? So is it form a third party? Is it try and move the Republican Party in a different direction? What advice might you have for folks who feel politically homeless right now?
Well, I've always been a Republican, and it would be very, very difficult for me to give that up. I do not want to concede that my party has become the party of Donald Trump. As I said earlier, I was very comfortable in the Republican Party, and it had these terrific people in it, people like Howard Baker and Bob Dole and all these people who who were really effective legislators, and they believed in the system and in getting things done. And then I, 6 different times I was the Republican nominee in our state, statewide, 6 different times. 5 times I won it. I carried the banner for our party, and I've campaigned for all these Republicans. And it's just how I've seen myself, and the idea of throwing that away. I don't want to do it. I don't want to concede that. But what we have now is all of the pressure, all of the push is from the Trumpians. That's the situation we're seeing now in the United States Senate. People are afraid, they know that there's this price to pay if they stand against Trump or vote to, or even criticize Trump. There's this price that they'll have to pay. And so I think we've got to be thinking about, okay, is there a pushback? Is there a way to push back? And I think that's what we have to focus on. We haven't yet. We've been just kind of punching bags. I mean, traditional Republicans have been punching bags. So how do we punch back? What do we do? Shouldn't there be some political price to pay for being this ugly kind of divisive style in politics, this angry? Shouldn't there be primary opponents for people? And shouldn't we be able to organize? And maybe we'll lose, okay? Maybe we'll lose primary, and nobody wants to do that. I mean, how do you talk somebody into, would you please run for office? And by the way, you're going to lose. But I think that's what we've got to be thinking of. Now, the history of third parties in our country has been grim. It's not, you'd have to ask a political scientist whether that has any real possibility. I think most people would say no, that a third party is not going to be viable. But so where are we now? I mean, so just say you're a conservative, okay, like me. Say you're a conservative. So what's the choice? I mean, what was the choice in the last election? Well, the choice was between Biden and Trump. And a lot of people would say, well, wait a second. We can't stand Trump, but with Biden, are we buying into this, what we would consider to be quite leftist political agenda? And so we are becoming the the Republican Party is no longer going to be an alternative to the Democratic Party. Conservative politics is no longer going to be a viable alternative to progressive politics if we follow this Trump line. And I will prove it to you. I will prove it to you, because look at Donald Trump. In 2016, he lost popular vote by 3 million people. In 2020, he lost the popular vote by 7 million people. He's going in the wrong direction. Then we go to Georgia. No way should we have lost 2 Senate seats in Georgia. No way should we have lost control of the US Senate. But that campaign was not fought on issues, it was fought on Trump. And Trump lost that election for us. So this is all before January the 6th. We were losing ground big time before January 6th. Then comes January 6th. Then comes the advent of Marjorie Taylor Greene in the Republican Party and people championing her. And we have got to be, I'm certain that since we lost the Georgia election, that was January the 5th, I am sure we've lost more ground. So what's the future? And is America going to be left politically between basically one choice? And that is, we move farther and farther to the left with no viable conservative opposition to it. And that's where I think we are. So I think from the standpoint of issues and policy and where we're going as a country, it really is important to regroup and to rediscover the viable party that we used to be.
Well, you know, Senator, as a Democrat, I would certainly enjoy there being what I think we need, as you say, a competitive center-right conservative party, so that basically, if nothing else, the ideas being espoused by the Democratic Party can get tested in what I would call it the way, you know, maybe it's a function of both your age and mine, the way things used to be on many, many issues. But what occurs to me is this: you ask the question, how do we do something about the Trump party at this point? It always seemed to me that if 25 senators at once stood up, as opposed to one at a time, it's always much harder to push back against a larger group. And particularly now with the impeachment in front of them, it reminds me a little of reading my history about what happened at the time of Joe McCarthy. For a long time, people sort of who knew better, Democrats and Republicans, shied away because they did not want to be put on one of McCarthy's lists or called a communist. But in the end, when people stood up to him, he fell. Is that what is there something inside the Republican Party today that can bring that about?
I think there has to be. You know, I mean, well, I am not going to concede that this is where we are. I'm just not going to do it. I am not going to concede that the Republican Party is the party of Trump. We just won't do it. So, but as I say, it's easier for me because I'm not going anywhere in politics. But you're absolutely right. I mean, what we need is groups of people, hopefully people who are in elective office, but people who aren't as well, supporters of the Republican Party, who just take the position that this is the wrong track. I mean, it's the wrong track as a matter of principle, but it's also the wrong track because it's politically, it's going nowhere.
You know, one of the things that you've devoted your life to is faith, and you do a lot of work around faith in public life. And I would be interested in your thoughts on the role religion. I know there's some questions in the chat that came up with this as well, which is, you know, it seems to me if we look at longer trends, America is becoming a less religious nation. Lots of denominations are losing adherence. At the same time, polarization is going up. A lot of this anger is going up. Is there a relationship between those two?
Yeah, I think, I know. I definitely think there is. So I think that a major, maybe the major purpose of America is to hold our country together. That from the get-go was, I mean, back when the Constitution was written, when we were a country of 3 or 4 million people, the purpose of served by the Constitution was, okay, how are we going to hold these competing, then mainly economic interests together? And so we developed this constitutional system designed to do that, the system of checks and balances, slow-moving system for sure, but it was capable of holding us together. Then came the Civil War, of course, we fell apart. Now we're really falling apart again. But that is the function of that's our purpose. I think e pluribus unum, one people, we the people, one people, that's our national purpose, at least one of the key national purposes that we have. And I also think that should be the function of religion. Now, religion can be extremely divisive and is often used for that purpose. People kill each other believing that they're doing so in the name of God. So religion can be divisive just as politics can be. But the meaning of the word religion, which comes from the same root as the word ligament, means to hold us together. And that is something that religion can bring to how we see ourselves as a people, not proselytizing, trying to convert people one way or another, but the idea that we respect one another, that we listen to one another, that we have a sense of humility, understanding that our political positions are not divine, they're just political positions, and the sense of knowing that your political opponent is a child of God. Those are religious concepts which, if developed, and if our religious communities became more active in politics, they're not trying to electioneer or anything like that, but more on the way that I'm speaking about it, more active in trying to address the polarization in America, then religion can be a major factor in helping bring us together.
Allison, you have another question for us?
I do. I actually have one that fits really well with this theme. With your faith background with the Episcopalian Church, how do you react to Christian leaders who loyally support former President Donald Trump as a chosen leader, as you were saying, a divine leader, or versus a politically appointed position, and or a leader that represents Christian values? How do you react to that?
You know, I don't want to just lump everybody together and act as a sort of my way is God's way and my understanding is God's understanding, and start flailing away at people in the name of religion. I don't want to do that myself. But as I said earlier, Trump is the most divisive person in our country since George Wallace. And if you believe that religion has work to do in holding us together, and that politics should have work to do in holding us together, then there is a major disjuncture between Donald Trump and religion.
So it's interesting that you bring up, you've now mentioned a couple times this idea that Donald Trump is the most divisive figure since George Wallace. I think a progressive criticism that we hear often about the Republican Party is that Donald Trump wasn't really an aberration, that he's just sort of what Republicans are. And while they've been able to sort of hide that, and perhaps some of these events afterwards have shown that, you know, Republicans, this is actually who Republicans are and who they've been for a long time. I would wonder how you would respond to that. That was the Republican Party before Trump actually something that was substantively different than after Trump, or was Trump a conclusion of what was happening?
Repeating what we talked about earlier. Well, first of all, the Trump version of the Republican Party is the opposite of what the Republican Party I knew. It's just not just different; it's the opposite. Different values. But I do think that there is this sense on the part of a lot of people that they have been left behind, that they have been abused, that they feel threatened, and that's what's happened. And that is, I think, a development that's been exacerbated recently.
Well, I guess maybe the comparison would be that I think some folks would say that maybe Donald Trump isn't that different than, let's say, Ronald Reagan or Newt Gingrich or someone, that these were divisive people. Do you see substantive differences between those two?
Well, I don't know about Gingrich, but no, right, not Reagan. No,
what
Reagan,
makes them different?
Look, Reagan was happy. I mean, Reagan was happy. You know, one thing I've thought about when I saw the picture of Hawley and with his fist in the air, and not just it, but his face. I mean, the expression on his face, and then compare that with just a picture of Ronald Reagan. I mean, Reagan was happy, and Reagan is Mike Deaver one time, Reagan's honcho. Deaver said people wanted to please him. That's true. I mean, I can remember when I had policy differences with Reagan, and I didn't like I did, but I didn't like that. I wanted to please him, and he was not a hateful person. He wasn't hateful. He didn't make people hate each other. He was not a divisive person, just the opposite. He was a person who was very optimistic. He believed in the country, and he tried to bring out the best in us, and not just this hateful, angry approach to politics that Trump represents. And a lot of this is style, you know. I mean, a lot of it is not, well, what's your policy on trade or this or that? A lot of it is just style and what are you trying to do as a public person? What are you trying to do? Are you trying to hold us together? Are you trying to make us one people? Are you trying to appeal to the better angels? Or instead, do you see your political future in dividing and making people at war with one another? They're two different styles. And so there is no comparison at all between Trump and Reagan. No.
So let me ask this question. If you were invited to sit down in the Oval Office with President Biden, and he said to you, what can I do? What would you recommend that I do to get past this partisan divide, recognizing there are always going to be differences. Having differences is not a problem. Having strong beliefs is not a problem. But what we've had, we all recognize why American Public Square exists, is this sort of uncivil sort of nastiness we're trying to get rid of. What advice, given the world that you know Joe Biden lives in, would you give him?
I'd say to him, Mr. President, you spent twice as much time in the US Senate as I did. You understand the role of the Senate. You understand what's called regular order, namely, how does a bill become a law? Help us return to the regular order. Help us restore the role of the US Senate as a place where people work out their differences. And that is the opposite of governing by executive order. It's the opposite of governing by reconciliation bills. It's a system where what we learn in school, how does a bill become a law? Well, a bill is introduced, it's referred to committee, there are hearings, there are amendments in committee, it goes to the floor, there are more amendments. And it's sausage making, as people say about legislation. It's sausage making, but it's worthwhile. That's what we do. We make sausage. It's not, here's the perfect legislation that's going to solve all of our problems. It's just legislation. It's something that comes out of some process. Well, the process doesn't exist now. The US Senate is broken. And so that's what I would say. Give people, ordinary members of the Senate, a sense that they are participants in something where their voices will be heard. Now they can be defeated, you know, so you offer an amendment, the amendment wins, the amendment loses, whatever happens to it. So that's it. But at least you've got a place where all of these differences can be accommodated somehow. And that does not exist now. So that's what I would say, restore the Senate and try to figure out a way of moving to the regular order and away from government by either executive order or the reconciliation process.
But let me, my follow-up on that would be, but if I'm sitting there as President Biden and I say to you, Senator, I agree with you, except your party is the party of Donald Trump, and they have no interest in the regular order, and I can get nothing done if they insist on behaving the way they have behaved. How should I solve that problem?
Yeah, and I would say, well, you know, this is it does work both ways. It certainly, I mean, as soon as Trump was elected, his opponents formed what they called the resistance, you know, proper noun, capital R, resistance. And they were going to resist everything. And they resisted confirmations of people, and they filibustered this and that, and they slowed everything down. So this is not simply the recalcitrance of Republicans, it's the recalcitrance of Democrats and Republicans both. And that is the current state of, I can't talk about the House, I wasn't ever there, but the Senate, which should be the place of bringing people together. So the problem is bipartisan, but it would be possible to put together a relatively small group of senators, bipartisan, 50-50, some Republicans, half Republicans, half Democrats, let's say 10 senators. And if they stuck by their guns, they could reform the Senate. I mean, they could insist on the regular order. They could insist that the filibuster would not be abused and just used for, you know, every motion to proceed. And they could, and some of us, there are a bunch of former senators who've been dealing with this, Chris Dodd and Paul Kirk and Chuck Hagel and I, and this is what we've been trying to promote. We haven't got very far with it, but to form within the Senate make the Senate work caucus, and that would just be, you know, a group, as I say, a group of people evenly divided, and that would be what they would do. It would not focus on what's your position on this issue or that, but simply the regular order, reestablishing the way things are done.
You know, there have been some questions in the chat that, again, I'm going to try and lump together, maybe around this general idea of kind of electoral reform. So there were some questions about the role that money in politics maybe has played in provoking tribalism. There have been some questions about primaries. And I think that what the question was sort of tying into maybe more gerrymandered districts where we have more extreme Democrat and extreme Republican districts. There have been questions around, we've had programs here at American Public Square around things like ranked choice voting or any of those things. Does anything in that space stand out to you, electoral reforms that perhaps could lead to some of these better outcomes?
Yeah, maybe I kind of have always had the view that when people talk about campaign reform, they're always talking about campaign finance reform. And that's a little bit of a off target. I don't know that much would be done, but even what you've got obviously with the Supreme Court cases, constitutional problems of trying to do anything. So I'm not sure that is worth the effort. But maybe there are things that can be done about gerrymandering. Maybe there are things that can be done about how primaries are conducted. I don't know. I mean, I don't have a clear view of it. I do think that it would be very useful to think in terms of what can be done to make campaigns themselves more informative. And so right now campaigns are pretty much, you know, a lot of commercials and tweets and short bursts and debates where people have 2 minutes to answer questions. Are there ways to smoke candidates out on serious stuff? Like, should we be concerned about the national debt? I mean, that would be kind of a neat question, and keep people on that one for a half an hour each, you know, so that any politician can dance for 2 minutes around anything. Now, if you tell them to dance for 30 seconds, or 30 minutes, they begin to look really silly. So I think that kind of campaign reform where you're thinking about smoking the candidates out on big policy issues, that would be very useful to do.
you think that there is a possibility for 2024 in the Republican Party of a non-Trump aligned candidate being the nominee?
Sure hope so. I think if Trump were the nominee, or if somebody, a Trumpian, were the nominee, we would be so far down the drain. I mean, maybe that's the best hope for our party. You know, we just absolutely get skunked because we become so repulsive that nobody can stand us anymore. And then we start thinking about, okay, let's stop doing that. So, but I sure hope that I hope we don't come to that point. I hope that we can regain some strength on the part of the more traditional Republicans.
I think we're getting some comments in the chats about people that folks would like to see as Republican candidates that are in there. I'm seeing a vote for Condoleezza Rice. There may be more when I scroll up there, but just throwing some names out there. But you know,
she won't do it. I know her very well. I said, no way.
But no question. I have throughout your political career, things like primaries, I think have changed. Like that, there was a time before where political parties played a much stronger role in selecting their candidates. Whereas now, I mean, you look in a state like Missouri, political parties allow anybody to jump in and select their candidate for president, their most important person that's there. And we hear this thing, we don't want to go back to the smoke-filled rooms, but maybe the smoke-filled rooms were actually kind of a good thing because Republicans were able to say, we're only going to let people represent our party that share our beliefs. Whereas now, and I think, look, the Democrats had the problem that Bernie Sanders, who was an independent for a long time, suddenly said, now I'm a Democrat, and he came very close to kind of hijacking the Democratic Party. So is some problem here, like just in having primaries? Should the parties reassert themselves to say we stand for X, Y, and Z, and we should try and prevent people from running for office if they don't share that?
Well, I think that's interesting. That's good, but it's not going to happen. You know, I mean, we're not going to go. I mean,
can't unring that bell. Yeah,
history
that bell's
does
been
not.
rung.
Yeah, I mean, it just doesn't. No, that's not going to. That's not. But I think that really the answer is more people who are not sort of on the fringes do vote in primaries and do get involved in campaigns. I mean, that's the answer, I think. Just a more energized, for my party, a more energized, mainstream Republican.
So if I were a young elected official and I came to sit and get some wisdom from you, and I would ask you, what are the things that I should keep in mind if I want to be a real legislator? In other words, that I would like to actually do something other than issue press releases.
Yeah, you have to, as I'm talking about the Senate, because that's what I know something a little bit about, but I think you have to return to the role of committees and writing legislation, because right now legislation is basically written by the White House and by the leadership of the parties, and the committees don't really do anything. So I think you've got to return to the regular order.
I think Allison has a question.
I do, and this is going to take us a bit of a different direction here at the end. There's been a few questions about the generational divides of the Republican Party. I mean, of course, there's been things that have happened policy-wise, but there's also been a lot that's changed technology-wise. And my generation's growing up a lot different. So this question says, many past Republicans like Bob Dole were World War II veterans, or they've had parents that served in World War II. Younger generations and current classes of politicians didn't grow up with the same exposure and impact of war that World War II had on older generations. Do you think that this contributes to the division within the Republican Party today?
Yeah, I think that insofar as Republicans concentrate on the social issues, the wedge issues, they lose the younger generation. I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't think we have to just totally reverse how we feel about, abortion or whatever. But I think it's a matter of emphasis and a matter of, are we just going to hammer these wedges and hammer these wedges? Because if we do, I don't have any doubt that we'll lose the younger generation. It's a very, very interesting how to get them back, and I think it's a big deal for our party to try to be more appealing to younger people.
Senator, we've come to the end of the program, and I can't thank you enough for agreeing to be part of this. We've got a very large audience watching this. Over 200 people have been tuned in, and I always watch the numbers to see how many people leave halfway through our programs, and no one left. So we did a very nice job.
That's a surprise. Usually when I'm around, people sit near the exit. So thanks, that's great.
I know the feeling. Allison, let me turn this over to you so you can close the program out, please.
Thank you, Alan and Mike and Senator Danforth for joining us this evening. I would like to also thank all of you who tuned in to tonight's program. I'd like to welcome you to join us for the continuation of our series presented in partnership with the Kansas City Star, Gun Violence in Missouri Seeking Solutions, next Wednesday, February 17th over the lunch hour, featuring a discussion about public health solutions to gun violence across the state of Missouri. Also coming up on February 25th, we are pleased to present E Pluribus Unum, Complexities and Contradictions, the Mythical America. In an American Public Square dual signature program, we will explore the founding contradictions of our country, imagined communities, and who we are versus how we actually show up, all in the form of a panel discussion. To find information and registration for this and other upcoming American Public Square events, please visit our website at americanpublicsquare.org. Here in a moment at the conclusion of this event, you'll be directed to a short post-event survey. Please take a few moments to complete it. This information helps us improve our events and lets us know what kinds of programs our supporters want to see. Finally, if you enjoyed this program and believe that conversations like this are important, please consider becoming a member of American Public Square. APS members help support our programs and allow us to continue providing a space for civil, fact-based conversations. You can learn more about membership and its benefits by visiting our website. Once again, we here at American Public Square at Jewel, thank you for joining us. Have a good evening and see you soon.
Thank you, Senator, very much for being with us.
Okay, Alan, good, thanks.